The U.S. Blackstar floated silently in the vast emptiness of space, its sleek black surface barely reflecting the distant stars. It was an imposing ship, built to defend Earth from the unknown dangers of the galaxy. Inside, the crew moved like shadows, their faces tense with anticipation. They knew something was coming. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. The alien forces had been growing stronger, and the Blackstar was Earth's last line of defense. Captain Reynolds stood on the bridge, staring out at the void, his mind racing. He had been through countless battles before, but this one felt different. The enemy wasn't just another alien fleet. They were a force that had already wiped out entire civilizations. Earth's enemies were closing in. The air on the bridge was heavy with the sound of distant beeping, the occasional murmur of crew members checking systems. Reynolds could feel the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him. He knew that if the Blackstar failed, Earth would fall. The ship was Earth's most advanced warship, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that it might not be enough. The odds were against them, and it wasn't just the Blackstar that would pay the price. It was every man, woman, and child back home. His crew was ready, but he wasn't sure if they were ready for what lay ahead. Suddenly, the tension in the air seemed to shift. The first warning signal blinked on the monitor, sending a ripple of unease through the crew. A strange signal had appeared. It was weak, barely a whisper, but it was enough to send everyone into high alert. Was it a trap? Had the enemy found them already? The crew knew better than to trust anything that came from the unknown. Commander Hill, the ship's tactical officer, leaned over the console, eyes narrowing. "It's too faint," she muttered. "I can't get a clear reading. It's not human. Definitely not one of ours." Captain Reynolds didn't need to hear more. The unknown signal was enough to make his blood run cold. It could be a trick, a way to lure them into a vulnerable position, or perhaps it was the beginning of something even worse. He turned to Hill. "Track it. Keep me posted on any changes." The crew worked in perfect synchrony, but even their best efforts couldn't quell the growing sense of dread that filled the air. Outside the Blackstar's thick hull, space was as quiet as a grave. The cold, infinite blackness was broken only by the occasional flash of distant stars. But something about the silence felt wrong. It wasn't the calm before the storm. It was the calm after the storm, the eerie quiet before the inevitable. As the hours ticked by, every minute felt like a lifetime. Each second stretched out longer than the last, each movement of the crew more careful, more deliberate. Captain Reynolds couldn't stop his mind from wandering to the past. He'd seen the devastation the enemy was capable of firsthand. Planets reduced to rubble, entire species wiped out without mercy. The horrors they'd left behind haunted his every step. He'd lost so many friends to their ruthless attacks. Now it was Earth's turn, and he was determined not to let history repeat itself. He watched as Hill adjusted the ship's course, scanning for any signs of danger. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden burst of static on the communication line. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but it grew louder, clearer. The strange signal was changing. It was no longer just a whisper. The Blackstar's systems beeped as they struggled to process the data, but the message remained unreadable. And then it happened. The signal grew louder still, more urgent. The entire bridge crew froze, staring at the screens in disbelief. It wasn't a signal anymore. It was a countdown. Earth's enemy was out there. They were closer than anyone had thought. The time to act was now. Captain Reynolds took a deep breath, steadying himself. He could hear the crew moving in the background, preparing for what was coming. He knew this moment would define them all. It would decide whether Earth lived or died. "Get us ready," he ordered, his voice firm despite the storm of doubt and fear inside him. "Whatever's out there, we meet it head-on." The countdown continued, each number ticking down toward what could be their final battle. As the minutes passed, the tension grew unbearable. The crew braced for impact, the fear evident in their eyes. But Captain Reynolds couldn't let that fear show. He had to be their rock, their strength. He had to keep them together. And then, in the quiet of space, as the Blackstar waited for the storm to break, the moment arrived. The enemy was here. Captain Reynolds took one final look out into the stars. The calm before the storm was over. The battle was about to begin. You said, the moment the strange countdown reached 0, everything changed. A massive ripple of energy spread across space, a shockwave that rattled the U.S. Blackstar from stem to stern. The crew jolted as the ship's sensors blared to life, warning of the incoming enemy fleet. Captain Reynolds' grip tightened around the armrest of his chair. He had expected it, but the reality was far more terrifying than he had imagined. Hundreds of ships, each larger and more menacing than anything they had seen before, emerged from the darkness of space. The enemy had arrived. "Shields up," Reynolds barked, his voice steady despite the growing panic in his chest. "All weapons to full power. Prepare for impact." The crew scrambled, moving with practiced urgency. Tactical officers raced to their consoles, adjusting settings and monitoring the enemy fleet's movements. The Blackstar's massive weapons systems hummed to life, charging for the first time since the earlier drills. But even as the ship powered up, a sense of unease settled over the crew. The size and scale of the enemy fleet were overwhelming. It was clear that this battle would be like nothing they had ever faced. Commander Hill, watching the enemy ships approach on her screen, couldn't hide her disbelief. "They're massive," she muttered under her breath. "How did they grow this strong so quickly?" Captain Reynolds didn't answer. He was too busy watching the rapidly closing distance between the Blackstar and the enemy. Every inch of space seemed to get smaller as the enemy ships filled the screens, their dark, foreboding shapes slowly taking over the view. Suddenly, the comms system crackled to life, breaking the tense silence. "This is Admiral Crane of the Earth Defense Fleet. We're on our way, but it's going to take us several hours to reach you. You need to hold out until we arrive." Reynolds didn't need to hear any more. He knew that Earth's fleet had been delayed. Resources were stretched thin, and their fleet was scattered. It was up to the Blackstar now. Alone. No reinforcements, no backup. "Commander, plot a course to intercept the lead enemy ship," Reynolds ordered, his voice sharp. Hill hesitated, glancing at her screens. "Captain, they're not slowing down. They're coming in fast." "Then we meet them head-on," Reynolds said, his eyes never leaving the view of the approaching fleet. "All hands, brace for impact." The Blackstar's engines roared to life as it charged forward, its sleek hull cutting through space at breakneck speed. Reynolds felt a surge of adrenaline as the ship hurtled toward the enemy, but he couldn't afford to let his nerves show. His crew relied on him to keep them focused, to show them that Earth would not go down without a fight. On the bridge, everyone held their breath as the Blackstar closed the gap between them and the enemy flagship. The enemy ships were unlike anything they had ever encountered. Strange, dark shapes that seemed to pulse with unnatural energy. They were built for destruction, with weapons that were more advanced than anything the Blackstar had. The very sight of them sent a chill down the spine of the crew. As they drew closer, the first shots rang out. A pulse of energy shot across space, slamming into the Blackstar's shields with a deafening roar. The ship shook violently, and alarms blared throughout the bridge. "Shields holding at 70%, reported Lieutenant Perez, his voice strained. "Return fire," Reynolds commanded, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Target their engines. Disable them." The Blackstar's weapons unleashed a torrent of fire, beams of concentrated energy streaking across space and hitting the enemy ships. For a moment, it seemed like they might have the upper hand. The enemy flagship took a hit, shuddering as its shields flared. But then, the enemy retaliated with a wave of energy pulses, each one more powerful than the last. The Blackstar's shields flickered under the strain, and the ship groaned as it absorbed the blows. "Reynolds, we can't keep this up," Commander Hill shouted, her voice filled with desperation. "We're outgunned. We need reinforcements. Now." But Captain Reynolds didn't flinch. He knew she was right. The Blackstar was outmatched, and Earth's defense fleet wasn't arriving in time. This battle would not be won with force alone. It would require every ounce of strategy and courage they had left. The enemy flagship's weapons recharged, and before anyone could react, it fired again, hitting the Blackstar dead center. The bridge lights flickered, and the ship lurched as the impact sent shockwaves through the hull. "Hull breach on Deck 3. Cried out the engineer. "We've lost power to several key systems." Reynolds gritted his teeth. The battle had only just begun, and already they were on the edge of defeat. But Earth's pride and determination burned brighter than any fear. "We hold them off," Reynolds growled, his voice a low, determined growl. "We show them what humanity is capable of. No matter what, we fight." The crew nodded, their resolve hardening in the face of overwhelming odds. The Blackstar was damaged, the enemy fleet was closing in, and the fate of Earth hung in the balance. But Captain Reynolds knew one thing for sure: no matter the cost, humanity would not go down quietly. The Blackstar's hull groaned under the weight of the relentless assault. Another massive blast rocked the ship, and alarms blared across the bridge. Sparks flew from the control panels, and the walls trembled as the ship struggled to maintain its course. Captain Reynolds' jaw tightened as he stared at the screen. The enemy flagship was just moments away from unleashing another barrage. It was a war of attrition, and the Blackstar was losing. "Shields are down to 50%, Lieutenant Perez shouted, his hands flying over the controls in a desperate attempt to stabilize the ship. "Hull integrity is weakening on all decks. We're taking critical damage. Keep firing." Reynolds barked, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We need to hit their engines. We can't let them get any closer." The Blackstar's weapon systems fired again, the bursts of energy lighting up the void of space as they collided with the enemy ships. One enemy vessel exploded in a burst of flames, but the others pressed forward, their firepower unrelenting. "We're not going to last much longer, Captain." Commander Hill's voice crackled through the comms. "We need to regroup and reassess. If we don't—" Reynolds cut her off, his eyes never leaving the screen. "We fight. We hold them off until help arrives. We don't give them the satisfaction of seeing us retreat." The crew exchanged nervous glances, but there was no hesitation in their actions. Despite the overwhelming odds they fought on, this was humanity's fight. This was Earth's last stand. As the Blackstar weaved between incoming blasts, Reynolds' mind raced. His crew was giving everything they had, but Earth's fate was in their hands now. And just when it seemed like all hope might be lost, a strange sensation washed over him. The ship's sensors began to pick up something new. "Captain," Hill called, her voice tinged with surprise. "I'm detecting something. A new fleet coming in fast. It's not Earth's. It's not the enemy either." Reynolds didn't have time to process it fully, but his instincts kicked in. He knew what this could mean. Reinforcements. Had Earth's fleet somehow managed to get here faster than expected? Or was it something else, something more dangerous? Before he could voice his thoughts, the mysterious fleet appeared on the radar. The ship's sensors didn't know how to categorize them. These vessels were unlike anything they had ever seen. Smaller than the enemy ships, but with a sleek, elegant design that stood in stark contrast to the brutal alien fleet attacking them. Then, out of the silence, a transmission came through. "This is the United Star Federation. We've received your distress signal and are here to assist." The message sent shockwaves through the bridge. The U.S. Blackstar wasn't alone anymore. There was a new player in the game, and they were here to fight. Reynolds blinked, not fully believing what he was hearing. United Star Federation. Who the hell are they? "Captain," Hill said, her voice cracking through the disbelief. "They've just opened fire on the enemy fleet. They're engaging them." Reynolds felt a surge of hope. Finally, something had changed. The enemy fleet was no longer the only threat in the void. The new fleet was powerful, launching energy blasts that lit up the dark expanse of space like a violent storm. Their ships seemed to glide effortlessly through the chaos, their weapons precision strikes that tore through the alien ships with terrifying accuracy. But even with the new fleet's help, the battle wasn't won yet. The enemy wasn't backing down. Instead, they began to regroup, focusing all their firepower on the new arrival. The battle intensified, and the Blackstar was caught in the middle of it. "We need to do more than just survive," Reynolds said, his voice filled with new determination. "We fight back. We can't let them wipe out the Federation before they even get a chance to prove themselves." "Yes, sir," Hill said with renewed purpose, already issuing orders to the crew. The Blackstar fired again, this time with more precision, coordinating its shots with the United Star Federation ships. The teamwork between the two fleets was immediate and deadly. The Blackstar's weapons tore into the enemy ships, while the Federation vessels swept through their flanks. Together, they started to push back against the overwhelming force. But just as the crew began to feel like victory might be within their grasp, something unexpected happened. A massive explosion erupted from one of the enemy ships. It was unlike any explosion the crew had ever seen. It was a cascade of energy, a chain reaction that spread quickly through the enemy fleet. "What's happening?" Hill shouted, her eyes wide with confusion. Reynolds' heart skipped a beat as he realized what was happening. They're retreating. The enemy ships began to scatter, their once organized formation falling apart as they fled into the void, leaving the battlefield behind. The Federation ships pursued them, their weapons lighting up the dark sky as they continued to press their advantage. The Blackstar's crew erupted in cheers, their exhaustion forgotten in the rush of victory. The battle was far from over, but in that moment, they had won. The tide had shifted. "All units, hold your fire," Reynolds ordered, his voice calm but filled with a deep sense of relief. "We've won this round. Let's make sure Earth is safe." For the first time in hours, the crew of the Blackstar allowed themselves to relax, even if only for a moment. The enemy had been forced to retreat, but they knew it wasn't the end. The galaxy was still a dangerous place, and the war wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, humanity had something to celebrate. The battle was only the beginning. The U.S. Blackstar drifted quietly through the cold void of space, its once powerful engines now eerily silent. The immediate threat had passed, but the crew knew the fight was far from over. Though the enemy had retreated, their retreat felt temporary, like the calm before another storm. Captain Reynolds stood at the front of the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at the battlefield. The Federation fleet had moved into formation, their sleek ships now surrounding the Blackstar. But despite the victory, the question lingered in everyone's mind. Who were these mysterious allies? And why had they come to Earth's aid? The Federation ships, though impressive, had appeared from nowhere, almost as if they had been watching, waiting for the right moment to intervene. Commander Hill approached Reynolds, her brow furrowed. "Captain, I've been analyzing their ships. They're advanced, way beyond anything we have. But there's something off about them. They don't feel like they belong in this part of the galaxy." Reynolds didn't turn to her, but nodded slowly. "I felt it too. There's something about them, like they're here for a reason we don't understand yet." He paused, his eyes scanning the communication screens, waiting for a message from their mysterious allies. But nothing came. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. "Captain," Hill continued, her voice strained, "the enemy fleet is still out there, regrouping. We've only bought ourselves time. If they come back." "They will come back," Reynolds finished for her, turning now to face his crew. "And when they do, we'll be ready." But even as he spoke, something in the pit of his stomach twisted. The Federation's intervention had been critical, but it felt too convenient, too orchestrated. Reynolds had spent enough years in the military to know that nothing ever came without a price. Just then, the comm system crackled to life, a voice booming over the intercom. "This is Admiral Crone of the United Star Federation. Captain Reynolds, we need to speak. Privately." Reynolds' mind raced. The Admiral's voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension that he couldn't ignore. "Patch him through to my office," Reynolds replied, his voice steady but guarded. He gestured to Hill. "Come with me." As the two officers made their way to the captain's private quarters, the reality of their situation began to settle in. The Federation was here, but what were they truly after? And why hadn't they revealed themselves earlier, during Earth's darkest days? Inside the small, dimly lit room, Reynolds sat behind his desk, his eyes fixed on the holographic screen that now flickered to life. Admiral Crone's face appeared, the man's sharp features and military uniform giving away his status. But there was an odd, unsettling calmness in his expression. "Captain Reynolds," Crone began, "I'm sure you have questions, and I understand your hesitation. But let me be clear, we did not come here out of the goodness of our hearts. Earth is an important piece of a much larger game. And while we do value your planet's resources, this is not just about your survival. It's about ours as well." Reynolds leaned forward, his suspicions confirmed. "So you're telling me this isn't just about Earth's future, it's about the Federation's too?" Crone's gaze remained steady. "Yes, the enemy you face today is not the only threat in this galaxy. There are others, far worse than what you've seen. We came to Earth because your planet, your people, have something we need, something we've been watching for a long time." Reynolds' pulse quickened. "And what is that?" Crone didn't answer immediately. He seemed to consider his words carefully, weighing the risks of what he was about to reveal. Finally, he spoke. "Your people possess an untapped potential, a unique ability that no one else in this galaxy has. Your capacity for innovation, adaptation, and survival makes you a valuable asset. You're more than just a military force, Captain. You're a symbol of resistance, and that is something we need, more than anything." Reynolds frowned. Resistance? Against what? The Admiral's face grew more somber. Against the true enemy, the one that has been lurking in the shadows for centuries, the one that has been wiping out entire civilizations. We are a part of a coalition that has been fighting them for years, and we failed. But your people, your resilience could be the turning point we need. The weight of Crone's words sank into Reynolds like a stone. The battle they had just fought, the mysterious Federation intervention, it was all part of something far larger than they had imagined. Earth wasn't just a target anymore. It was a key player in a war that spanned the galaxy. "We're not just fighting for Earth's survival anymore, Captain," Crone continued. "We're fighting for the entire galaxy." Reynolds sat back in his chair, processing the enormity of it all. His mind raced as the implications of the Admiral's words stank in. The enemy they had faced was just a small part of something much greater, something far darker. And Earth had just been thrust into the center of it all. "We'll need more than just weapons and ships," Reynolds said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "We'll need answers. We'll need allies who can fight beside us. And we'll need to understand what we're up against, because I have no intention of becoming anyone's pawn." Crone's expression shifted slightly, a hint of respect in his eyes. "That's the spirit, Captain. But time is running out. The enemy will return, and when they do, we'll need you to be ready." Reynolds nodded, a fire igniting in his chest. He had no illusions about the road ahead. It would be dangerous, it would be messy, and the stakes had never been higher. But as long as there was breath in his lungs, he would fight. He would lead humanity into this new war, into this battle for the galaxy. And he would make sure Earth wasn't just a victim. It was time to turn the tide. "We're ready," Reynolds said, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "And we won't back down." The tension in the briefing room was palpable as Captain Reynolds gathered his officers and the newly arrived Federation representatives. The walls of the Blackstar's war room were lined with holographic displays, each flashing with data and schematics of the galaxy. On the table before them, A map of the region, dotted with star systems, and the routes taken by the enemy, was projected in vivid detail. Reynolds stood at the head of the room, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the map. His mind was still processing everything Crone had told him. The Federation's sudden appearance had been a game-changer, but as far as Reynolds was concerned, their motivations were still shrouded in mystery. It wasn't just their technology or their strange ships. It was the way they had positioned themselves, how they had shown up exactly when Earth needed them most. He looked around the room at his officers, all focused and alert. Lieutenant Perez was staring intently at his console. Lieutenant Commander Blake was hunched over a tablet, scrolling through data, and Commander Hill stood by his side, her brow furrowed as she waited for the briefing to begin. Finally, the doors slid open and Admiral Crone entered, flanked by two other Federation officers, both of them humanoid, but distinctly different from humans. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, their eyes an unnatural shade of violet. They were tall and elegant, their posture regal, but there was an unsettling coldness about them. Reynolds gave them a brief nod before turning his attention back to the map. Admiral Crone, it's time we get to the heart of the matter. We fought our first battle together. But what happens next? What exactly are we dealing with here? Crone stepped forward, his voice calm and measured. You are dealing with an existential threat, Captain. The enemy you encountered, the ones you fought off, are merely a front for something far more dangerous. They are the vanguard of an ancient, relentless force known as the Vortha. They have been sweeping through galaxies, erasing entire civilizations. A low murmur spread across the room as Reynolds absorbed the weight of Crone's words. The Vortha sounded like a myth, a horror story whispered in the darkest corners of space. We've encountered them before, but we've never been able to stop them. Crone continued. They are ruthless, efficient, and they adapt quickly. Entire fleets have been decimated by them. That's why we need Earth in this fight. Your species has something they don't: human ingenuity. Reynolds wasn't sure if he should be insulted or flattered. Ingenuity? What do you mean by that? Crone's violet eyes locked onto his. Humanity is a wild card. While we, the Federation, rely on technology and strategy, your people have something else. You fight with heart, with creativity. When faced with impossible odds, humans find ways to turn the tide. That's what the Federation has been watching for years. We need that edge. Commander Hill spoke up, her voice sharp. So we're supposed to be your secret weapon. You want to use humanity's heart as a way to win your war. Crone's expression remained unreadable. It's not about using you, Commander. It's about fighting alongside you. Together, we can end the Vortha threat. But we have limited time. The Vortha will be back, and when they return, they will come with everything they have. Reynolds glanced at Hill, then back at Crone. And what do you expect from us? Our fleet is already stretched thin. We've barely managed to hold the line. We have a plan, Crone said, his voice low and steady. But it requires more than just your military might. It requires your best minds, your scientists, your engineers. We've identified a weakness in the Vortha's strategy, something we can exploit. But we'll need your help to develop the weapons, the tech, and the strategy to turn the tide. Reynolds felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. All right, we'll work with you. But if we're going to do this, we need a guarantee. We need to know that when this is all over, Earth's survival is not just an afterthought. We don't need another alliance that's built on promises of help that never come. Crone hesitated for a moment, then nodded. You have my word, Captain. The Federation will honor our commitments to Earth. You won't fight this war alone. The weight of the promise hung in the air, and Reynolds knew it wasn't a guarantee of victory, but it was something. It was the only chance Earth had. As the meeting continued, Reynolds listened closely to the details of the Federation's strategy. The Vortha were like a storm on the horizon, unseen yet deadly. The Federation's resources were stretched thin, but they had a vast network of allies and technologies that Earth could tap into. The immediate objective was to build up Earth's fleet, develop advanced weaponry, and formulate a strategy that could take the fight directly to the Vorth's heart. It wouldn't be easy. It would require sacrifice, collaboration, and a level of commitment that Earth had never known. But one thing was clear: if Earth was going to survive, it would have to fight with everything it had. When the meeting adjourned, Reynolds found himself once again standing before the holographic map of the galaxy. The enemy was out there, waiting for their next move. But for the first time, Earth had allies. Real allies who weren't just offering empty promises. "We're not just fighting for our survival anymore," Reynolds muttered to himself, his fingers tracing the map. "We're fighting for the future of the galaxy." He turned to Hill, who was watching him closely. "Prepare the crew. We have work to do." She nodded, her expression firm. "Aye, Captain. We'll be ready." Reynolds took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the coming battle settle over him. The Federation had brought Earth into their war, but this was no longer just their fight. It was humanity's fight, and they would make sure the galaxy would remember who had turned the tide. The U.S. Blackstar wasn't just a ship anymore. It was a symbol, a beacon of hope in a galaxy on the brink of annihilation. And it would fight to the very end. The battle was far from over, but Earth's resolve had never been stronger. The moment the Blackstar entered the heart of enemy space, the atmosphere aboard the ship shifted. The crew, once filled with anticipation, now faced the grim reality of the war they had been drawn into. Captain Reynolds stood on the bridge, staring out into the vastness of space. Ahead of them, a deadly silence hung over the system, where the Vorth's forces lay waiting like predators poised to strike. "Captain, we've entered the coordinates," Lieutenant Perez reported, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. Reynolds gave a single nod. "Understood. Hold position. No one makes a move until we get the go-ahead." The U.S. Blackstar was surrounded by an eerie quiet. The hum of the engines, the gentle chime of consoles, all seemed muted as the crew prepared for the unknown. Their mission was clear: infiltrate the Vortha stronghold, gather intelligence, and sabotage their war efforts. But the reality of facing an enemy so ruthless and unknown left a weight on everyone's shoulders. "Commander Hill, status on our stealth systems?" Reynolds asked, keeping his voice calm but firm. Hill's eyes flickered over her console, her face tense as she worked through the systems. "The stealth field is holding, Captain, but the Vortha have been known to have advanced detection technology. We're not invisible forever." "We'll make do," Reynolds replied, his voice resolute. "I don't need invisible. I need fast and lethal. They're not expecting us, but that doesn't mean we can afford to be careless." The briefing earlier that day had emphasized just how dangerous the Vortha were. Their forces were vast, their ships a terrifying combination of advanced technology and brutal military tactics. And yet, the Federation's presence, their technology, had leveled the playing field. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Earth's people a fighting chance. The Blackstar's advanced weapons systems had been upgraded with Federation tech, giving them the edge they needed to punch through enemy lines. But Reynolds knew, deep down, that no matter how advanced their weaponry was, there were some forces in the galaxy that couldn't be calculated or predicted. "Captain, we've got incoming signals," Lieutenant Commander Blake spoke up, his voice urgent. "Patch them through," Reynolds ordered, his instincts sharpening. The main view screen flickered, and the image of Admiral Crone appeared. His violet eyes glinted with concern, though his voice remained calm. "Captain Reynolds, it's time. You need to move quickly. The Vortha fleet is on high alert. You don't have much time." Reynolds didn't hesitate. "Understood, Admiral. We're moving out." He turned to Hill, who was already preparing the crew for the next stage of the mission. The Blackstar's engines roared to life, pushing the ship forward as it slipped deeper into enemy territory. Every member of the crew was ready, poised for what would likely be the most dangerous mission they had ever faced. "We've got a target," Blake called out, "a Vortha communications relay. If we take it out, we'll cripple their ability to coordinate their forces. But it's heavily guarded. We're looking at a full battalion of Vortha ships in the area. Then we'll give them a reason to remember us," Reynolds said, his tone hardening. The bridge crew tensed as the Blackstar approached the enemy's defenses. Ahead of them, a swarm of Vortha ships loomed. Their dark silhouettes stood against the backdrop of distant stars, their weapon systems already locking onto the Blackstar signature. The first shots rang out as enemy vessels unleashed a barrage of firepower. "Shields holding," Lieutenant Perez called out. "Return fire," Reynolds barked. "Target their engines. We don't need to wipe them out, just cripple them." The Blackstar's weapons flared to life, its cannons delivering a devastating volley that tore through the closest enemy ship, sending it spiraling into the void. The crew held their breath as the ship dodged incoming fire, maneuvering expertly through the chaos of battle. But the Vortha weren't just going to roll over. They retaliated with precision, their weapons ripping through the Blackstar's shields, leaving deep scorch marks on its hull. "We've got incoming. 3 more ships on our tail," Blake shouted. Reynolds clenched his fists. "Hold steady. We're not backing down now." The Blackstar lurched as the enemy ships closed in, their firepower unrelenting. But just as the Vortha thought they had the Blackstar cornered, a sudden explosion tore through the enemy ranks. Another Federation ship, one that had arrived on the tail of the Blackstar, had engaged the Vortha in a surprise attack, taking down 2 of their ships in one fell swoop. "Nice timing," Reynolds muttered, his lips curling into a tight smile. "1 down, 2 to go," Hill called out, already plotting their next move. The Blackstar surged forward, capitalizing on the confusion. Reynolds didn't give the Vortha a moment to regroup. Every shot fired was calculated, every move designed to disrupt their formation. "We've got a clear shot at the relay," Perez shouted, his hands flying across the controls. "Take it," Reynolds commanded without hesitation. The Blackstar's weapons locked onto the Vortha communications relay, and with one final blast, it shattered, sending sparks and debris into space. "We've done it," Blake said, his voice laced with relief. But Reynolds knew the battle wasn't over. The Vortha would retaliate, and they'd come back stronger, angrier. They had no idea what Earth was capable of now. No idea what humanity could bring to the table. "Prepare for the counterattack," Reynolds ordered, his tone steely. This was just the beginning. The Vortha have learned what it means to face humanity on the battlefield, and they won't forget it. The crew braced for what was to come, knowing that the war had only just begun, and the U.S. Blackstar was the tip of humanity's spear. The battle had left the crew of the U.S. Blackstar exhausted, but they were far from finished. Captain Reynolds stood on the bridge, his gaze steady as he observed the aftermath of the skirmish. The enemy fleet, though battered, was regrouping. The Vortha were relentless, and the Federation's victory would not come easily. "Damage report," Reynolds commanded, his voice calm but firm, hiding the tension that simmered beneath. "Shields are at 65%, Captain. Hull integrity is holding steady, but we've lost 2 forward cannons. We're going to need to make some repairs," Lieutenant Perez reported, eyes darting across the console in front of him. Reynolds nodded grimly. They'd taken a hit, but they were still alive, still in the fight. "What about the relay?" "Destroyed," Lieutenant Blake confirmed. "The Vortha's communications network has been severely disrupted. They won't be able to coordinate their forces as efficiently anymore." "Good, but it's not enough," Reynolds said, turning to face the rest of his crew. "The Vortha will rebuild. They will come for us. We need to push forward, hit them where it hurts." He knew the Federation couldn't afford to simply keep fighting these small skirmishes. The war was far from over, and each battle would determine how long humanity would survive against the overwhelming force of the Vortha. "Captain, we've received a message from the Admiral," Blake said, bringing up the secure channel on the screen. Reynolds straightened, steeling himself for what was coming. The face of Admiral Crone appeared on the screen, his expression serious. "Captain, I need you to push forward. We've identified a Vortha supply depot located on a remote planet just beyond their main fleet. If we destroy it, we'll cripple their ability to maintain their forces. This is our chance to turn the tide." Reynolds' mind raced as he considered the implications. A supply depot was a critical target. If they could hit it hard and fast, they would take away the Vortha's lifeblood, their resources, but it wouldn't be easy. "Understood, Admiral," Reynolds replied, his voice unwavering. "We'll be ready. How long before we reach the target?" "Approximately 6 hours. You'll need to move quickly. The Vortha are already aware of our presence in the system, and they won't waste time trying to stop you." Reynolds paused, then made his decision. "We'll take the fight to them." "Prepare the crew for another push. This time, we're going in hot." As the call ended, the crew immediately sprang into action. They didn't need to be told twice. They knew what was at stake. Humanity's future depended on their success. "We'll be entering enemy territory again," Reynolds said, turning to his officers. "Keep your eyes sharp. Expect heavy resistance. But remember, we've already shown them that we're not afraid of a fight." The crew nodded, a sense of unity settling over them. They had just taken on a Vortha fleet and lived to tell the tale. Now, they were about to strike the heart of the enemy's supply lines. The Blackstar's engines roared to life once more, the ship leaping forward through the void of space with deadly intent. The Vortha would be expecting reinforcements, but they wouldn't expect what the humans were capable of. And this time, the element of surprise would be on their side. As they neared the planet, Reynolds watched the sensor readings carefully. A fleet of Vortha warships loomed in orbit around the supply depot, their presence a clear sign of how important the depot was to their war efforts. "Captain, we've got incoming," Lieutenant Perez called out, his voice tense. "Vortha ships are converging on our position. They know we're here." Reynolds gritted his teeth. So much for the element of surprise. "All hands, brace for impact." The ship lurched as enemy fire struck the Blackstar's shields, sending shockwaves through the vessel. But the crew didn't falter. They had been through worse. And this time, they were ready. "We'll take them head-on," Reynolds ordered. "Concentrate fire on their lead ship. We need to clear a path to that depot." The Blackstar's weapons fired relentlessly, tearing through the Vortha ranks. Explosions filled space as enemy ships disintegrated under the force of the Federation's firepower. But the Vortha were relentless. For every ship they destroyed, 2 more took its place. "Shields are down to 45%. Blake shouted, his eyes glued to the monitors. "We need to finish this fast." "Keep pushing," Reynolds barked, his eyes scanning the battlefield. He saw the supply depot ahead, a massive structure with towering spires and energy shields crackling around it. The Vortha had turned it into a fortress. "We can't go around it," Reynolds said, his voice determined. "We'll go straight through." He gripped the armrest of his chair as the Blackstar surged forward, cutting through the Vortha defenses. The ship's weapons continued to blaze, its crew moving with precision. In that moment, Reynolds could feel the weight of humanity's hopes resting on their shoulders. This was their moment. If they could just get through, they would strike a blow to the Vortha that they would never forget. As the Blackstar drew closer to the depot, Reynolds saw a flicker of hesitation in the Vortha forces. For a brief moment, they faltered, and that was all the crew needed. "Fire," Reynolds commanded. The Blackstar's weapons erupted, and a focused blast tore through the shields of the supply depot. The explosion sent shockwaves through space, and the depot erupted in a burst of light. "Direct hit," Lieutenant Perez called out, his voice filled with a rare note of triumph. The Vortha fleet immediately began to retreat, their morale shattered by the destruction of their supply lines. The mission had been a success, but Reynolds knew this was only a temporary victory. The Vortha would come again, and next time they would be prepared. But for now, The U.S. Blackstar had proven that humanity was not to be underestimated. "We've shown them what it means to face us," Ranald said quietly, watching the remnants of the Vortha fleet scatter. "And we're just getting started." The crew stood in stunned silence for a moment, the weight of their success settling in. They had struck a decisive blow, but they also knew the war was far from over. The galaxy had witnessed humanity's wrath, and now the stars would tremble at the thought of what the humans would do next.